Right now, as I sit here telling you this story, my son Brian and his wife Jennifer are about to discover that their private weekend gathering has been broadcasting live to their entire social media network for the past 30 minutes. Hidden throughout their house are sophisticated recording devices and streaming equipment that I installed while they were out of town, triggered to automatically broadcast their conversations to Facebook Live, Instagram, and our neighborhood chat groups. For 2 years, they've been systematically destroying my confidence and isolating me from my community, all while pretending to be devoted caregivers. In exactly 10 minutes, when their friend Amy notices the recording light on Jennifer's phone, their cruel mockery of my grief and their calculated plan to steal my independence will be exposed to everyone they know. You know what's different about betrayal from your own child? When a stranger hurts you, it stings. When a friend disappoints you, it aches. But when your own son looks at you like you're nothing more than a burden to be managed, it cuts so deep you wonder if you'll ever heal. The worst part isn't even what they do to you. It's realizing they've been laughing about it behind your back, treating your grief and loneliness like entertainment for their friends. Have you ever walked out of a room and felt like the conversation changed the moment you left? Like people were talking about you, but you couldn't quite prove it? That feeling in your gut that something wasn't right, even when everyone insisted you were imagining things? Right now, I'm sitting in my cozy new apartment, a cup of tea warming my hands and sunlight streaming through windows I chose myself. It's funny how quiet moments can feel like the biggest victories. I'm curious where you are as you listen to this story. Let me know in the comments, and let's share this peaceful moment together. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because understanding how I got here is the only way to understand why I had to fight back so hard. 2 years ago, I was Constance Miller, a recently retired high school English teacher trying to navigate life without Robert, my husband of 38 years. When he died from pancreatic cancer after a brutal 6-month battle, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away. But I wasn't alone. I had Brian, my only child, who had always been my anchor through life's storms. Brian was 34 then, a successful marketing consultant with his own firm. He'd married Jennifer 3 years earlier, and while I'd always felt a bit of distance from my daughter-in-law, I attributed it to natural adjustment. She was polished and ambitious, different from the warm, nurturing women Robert and I had imagined Brian might choose. But love is love, and I wanted my son to be happy. In those first months after Robert's funeral, Brian visited constantly. He'd show up with groceries, help with yard work, and sit with me during those terrible evening hours when grief hits hardest. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom," he'd say, holding my hand. "Dad would want me to take care of you." I felt so grateful to have raised such a devoted son, but Jennifer's presence during those visits felt different. She'd arrive with Brian, offer polite condolences, then spend most of her time scrolling through her phone or making subtle observations about my housekeeping. "Constance, maybe you should consider hiring a cleaning service," she'd suggest with false concern. "This big house is a lot to maintain alone. You don't want to let things get overwhelming." I dismissed her comments as awkward attempts at helpfulness. After all, she'd never lost a spouse. How could she understand that leaving Robert's coffee mug in the sink or his book on the nightstand wasn't neglect? It was the only way I could bear to wake up each morning. The real warning signs came from Mrs. Chen, my neighbor and former teaching colleague, who lived 3 houses down. Helen Chen had been my closest friend for 15 years. We'd carpooled to school together, shared countless dinners, and supported each other through every major life event. If anyone could read people accurately, it was Helen. "Something's not right about how Jennifer talks to you," Helen told me one afternoon as we shared tea in my garden. "I was here when they visited last week, and I watched her correct you 3 times during one conversation. About your own memories, Constance. She's undermining your confidence." I laughed it off. "Helen, you're reading too much into things. Jennifer's just direct." "Some people express care differently," but Helen pressed on. "And Brian's changing too. Last month, when you mentioned wanting to visit your sister in Phoenix, he immediately started listing reasons why travel would be difficult for you. Since when does Brian discourage you from seeing family? Number 3. I hadn't noticed that pattern then, but Helen was right. Slowly, subtly, my support system was being dismantled. When I mentioned book club meetings, Jennifer would sigh and say, "Are you sure you're up for social commitments right now? Grief affects people differently, and pushing yourself too hard might not be healthy." Brian would nod in agreement, adding, "Mom, maybe you should focus on taking care of yourself before worrying about outside activities." Their concern felt loving, protective. I started skipping book club meetings, telling myself I needed more time to heal. I canceled lunch plans with former colleagues, convinced that I wasn't ready for social interactions. Within 6 months, my social calendar had shrunk to almost nothing, leaving Brian and Jennifer as my primary connection to the outside world. The gaslighting started so gradually I barely noticed it happening. Jennifer would make cutting remarks about my appearance or decisions, then act confused when I seemed hurt. "Constance, I was just suggesting that maybe a different hairstyle might be more flattering. I'm trying to help you feel better about yourself. You seem so sensitive lately." When I'd turn to Brian for support, he'd side with his wife every time. "Mom, Jennifer's just looking out for you. Maybe you are being a little oversensitive. Grief can make us react more emotionally to things." They created a perfect system. Jennifer would deliver the criticism disguised as concern, and Brian would validate her assessment while making me question my own emotional stability. I began to doubt my perceptions, wondering if my grief really had made me paranoid and overly reactive. The isolation accelerated after my first-year grief anniversary. I'd planned a small memorial service for Robert, wanting to gather friends and family to share memories and celebrate his life. But when I mentioned this to Brian and Jennifer, their response was swift and discouraging. "Mom, is that really a good idea?" Brian asked. "You've been struggling emotionally, and putting together an event like that might be too stressful. Plus, it could be awkward for people." "Everyone's moved on," Jennifer added. "Maybe a private memorial would be more appropriate. Just the 3 of us. You don't want to burden people with your grief or make them uncomfortable." I canceled the service, telling myself they were protecting me from embarrassment. But Helen Chen was furious when she heard. "They're isolating you, Constance. Can't you see what's happening? They're making you dependent on them while cutting you off from everyone who actually cares about you." "Helen, they're my family. They're trying to help me through a difficult time." "No," Helen said firmly. "Family that truly cares doesn't make you smaller. They don't make you question your own judgment or discourage you from connecting with friends. This isn't protection, it's control." But Helen's warnings fell on deaf ears. I was so grateful to have anyone showing concern for my well-being that I couldn't see the manipulation hidden within their care. I was vulnerable, grieving, and desperately afraid of being truly alone. Brian and Jennifer positioned themselves as my saviors while systematically destroying my ability to save myself. The financial manipulation began about 18 months after Robert's death. Brian started expressing concern about my ability to manage money independently. "Mom, I noticed you paid the same bill twice last month, and you forgot about the property tax deadline. Maybe it's time to let me help with the finances." I had made those mistakes, small errors born from grief and distraction. But instead of treating them as normal human lapses, Brian and Jennifer presented them as evidence of cognitive decline. "It's normal for people your age to struggle with complex financial decisions," Jennifer would say with false sympathy. "There's no shame in needing help." They convinced me to add Brian to my checking account, just for emergencies. They encouraged me to let them handle communications with my bank and investment advisor. Gradually, I lost oversight of my own financial situation, trusting them to manage everything while they assured me I was too stressed to handle money matters right now. Helen tried one more time to warn me. She came over on a rainy Thursday afternoon, clutching a cup of coffee and wearing the expression she used to reserve for the most troubled students in our classes. "Constance, I've been watching this for months, and I can't stay quiet anymore. They're not protecting you, they're controlling you. You've stopped seeing friends, stopped participating in activities you love, stopped making decisions about your own life. This isn't grief recovery, it's systematic isolation. Helen, please. I know you mean well, but Brian is my son. He loves me. Then why does he discourage you from spending time with people who've known you for years? Why does Jennifer criticize everything you do and then claim she's helping? Why are you second-guessing every decision you make? I asked her to leave that day. I was so convinced that Brian and Jennifer's version of reality was correct that I couldn't hear the truth even from my dearest friend. They had successfully positioned themselves as my only reliable support system while making me believe that anyone who questioned their methods was either jealous or didn't understand my situation. That was their masterpiece. They'd made me complicit in my own isolation, grateful for their manipulation because I was too broken to recognize it as abuse. I was the perfect victim, vulnerable, dependent, and completely convinced that the people destroying my life were actually saving it. For 2 years, I lived in that carefully constructed prison, believing my captors were my protectors. I had no idea that the worst betrayal was yet to come, or that it would arrive in the form of an accidentally sent voice message that would shatter every illusion I'd been living under. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 weeks ago. I was sitting in my kitchen, stirring honey into my tea, and trying to work up the courage to call Helen Chen. We hadn't spoken in months, not since I'd asked her to leave that awful afternoon when she tried to warn me about Brian and Jennifer. The guilt had been eating at me, and I'd finally decided to apologize for my behavior. My phone buzzed with a voice message notification. Brian's name appeared on the screen, and I smiled, thinking he was checking in on me as he did every few days. I pressed play and put the phone to my ear, expecting his usual, "Hey, Mom, just wanted to see how you're doing," greeting. Instead, I heard something that stopped my heart. God. Jen, I swear to God, I can't take much more of this pathetic, clingy behavior from my mother. Brian's voice was filled with disgust. Nothing like the gentle tone he used when speaking to me directly. She called me 3 times yesterday because she couldn't figure out how to work the new television remote. 3 times, Jennifer, for a remote control. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it in confusion. This had to be a mistake. Brian would never talk about me like this, but his voice continued, and I realized with growing horror that he was leaving a message for Jennifer, not me. And then she starts crying because she's lonely and wants us to come over for dinner again. I'm like, we were just there Sunday, and it was torture. She made that gross casserole that tastes like cardboard, and then spent 2 hours telling the same stories about Dad for the 100th time. I wanted to scream. Jennifer's laughter echoed in the background, followed by her voice. Did you see her face when I suggested she might want to think about assisted living? She looked like a kicked puppy. It's almost too easy. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. This couldn't be real. These weren't the voices of the people who claimed to love and protect me. These were strangers, cruel strangers who sounded like they genuinely despised me. Brian's voice continued, and each word felt like a physical blow. The best part is how grateful she is for everything we do. Yesterday, I told her she seemed confused about her medications, and she immediately started second-guessing herself. She's so broken from Dad's death that she'll believe anything we tell her about her own mental state. Speaking of which, Jennifer's voice chimed in. I've been researching power of attorney procedures. If we can get a doctor to officially document some cognitive decline, we can take full control of her finances. That house alone is worth $400,000, and she's got at least another $300 in savings and retirement accounts. I stopped breathing. Power of attorney. They were planning to take control of my finances by having me declared incompetent. Everything Helen had tried to warn me about was true, but it was so much worse than even she had suspected. How long do you think before we can make that happen? Brian asked, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Doctor, Patterson already thinks she's showing signs of early dementia because of all the concerning behaviors I've been reporting. I told him she's been forgetting conversations, making poor financial decisions, and becoming increasingly dependent on us for basic tasks. One more visit where she seems confused, and he'll probably recommend a cognitive evaluation. They were setting me up. Every time I'd made a small mistake, every moment of grief-induced confusion, every instance where their gaslighting had made me doubt myself, they'd been documenting it as evidence of mental decline. They were building a case to steal my independence and my life savings, but the cruelest revelation was still coming. God, I can't wait until we can stick her in one of those memory care places, Brian said, his voice filled with callous satisfaction. No more Sunday dinners, no more crying phone calls, no more pretending to care about her boring stories. We can visit once a month to keep up appearances, and the rest of the time we can actually live our lives. Jennifer laughed again, a sound that made my skin crawl. And the best part is she'll probably thank us for it. She's so convinced that we're her devoted caregivers that she'll think assisted living is us looking out for her best interests. I should probably practice my concerned son act for when we have her. Evaluated, Brian said, and then his voice changed completely, taking on the gentle, caring tone I knew so well. Mom, we're just worried about you. You've been so forgetful lately, and we want to make sure you're safe. They both burst into laughter, and I realized with sickening clarity that this was how they saw me. Not as a grieving widow deserving of compassion, but as an obstacle to be managed and eventually disposed of. Every kind word, every gesture of care, every moment of false concern had been an act designed to manipulate me into compliance. The voice message continued for another 3 minutes, detailing their timeline for having me declared incompetent, their plans for selling my house, and their excitement about accessing my retirement accounts. They discussed me like I was already dead, dividing up my assets and planning my institutionalization with the casual cruelty of people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. When the message finally ended, I sat in complete silence for nearly an hour. The tea grew cold in my hands. The morning sun moved across my kitchen table. Birds sang outside my window. But inside me, something fundamental had shattered and rebuilt itself into something entirely different. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was furious. For 2 years, I'd let these people convince me that I was failing, declining, becoming a burden. I'd accepted their version of reality so completely that I'd lost faith in my own perceptions. But that voice message had shown me the truth. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being systematically destroyed by people who were supposed to love me. I spent the rest of that day going through my house with new eyes, looking for evidence of their manipulation. I found it everywhere. Financial documents had been moved and reorganized. Mail had been redirected. Phone numbers for old friends had been deleted from my contact list. They'd been working behind the scenes for months, isolating me and preparing for the moment when they could take complete control. That evening, I drove to Robert's grave for the first time in weeks. Kneeling beside his headstone, I finally understood what his final words to me had meant. 2 days before he died, when he was barely conscious from the pain medication, he'd grabbed my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Don't let them make you small, Connie. You're stronger than they know." At the time, I thought he was talking about grief, about not letting loss diminish me. But now I realized he'd seen something I'd missed. Somehow, even in his weakened state, Robert had recognized the threat Brian and Jennifer posed to my independence. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen," I whispered to his grave. "I'm sorry I let them convince me I was broken, but I'm going to fix this, Robert. I'm going to show them exactly how strong I really am." Standing up, brushing dirt from my knees, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years: complete clarity. Brian and Jennifer had spent months positioning me as a helpless victim who needed their protection. They had no idea they'd actually been creating their own worst nightmare, a woman with nothing left to lose and every reason to fight back. The first thing I did after discovering the truth was something I should have done months earlier. I called Helen Chen. It was 9 o'clock that same Tuesday evening, and when she answered, her voice carried the cautious politeness of someone who'd been hurt by a friend's rejection. "Constance? Is everything all right?" "Helen," I said, my voice breaking with shame and relief. "I need to apologize to you. For everything. And then I need your help, because you were right about Brian and Jennifer. You were right about all of it. 20 minutes later, Helen was sitting at my kitchen table while I played Brian's voice message on speaker. I watched her face change from concern to shock to absolute fury as she listened to my son and daughter-in-law discuss their plans to steal my life. Those monsters, she whispered when the message ended. Constance, this is elder abuse. This is criminal fraud. They're not just manipulating you, they're planning to rob you blind. Helen's anger was different from my own cold rage. Where I felt calculating determination, she burned with protective indignation. We're going to expose them, she said firmly. But we need to be smart about this. They've spent 2 years building a case against your competency. We need to build a better case proving their manipulation. I don't know how to do that, I admitted. I don't understand social media or recording technology or any of the tools we'd need to catch them. Helen smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. But I know someone who does. My grandson Kevin is home from college for spring break. He's studying computer science and cybersecurity, and he's been trying to educate me about online privacy and digital manipulation for years. After what he hears on that voice message, I guarantee he'll want to help. The next morning, Helen brought Kevin to my house. He was 20 years old, tall and serious, with the kind of intense focus that reminded me of my best students. When Helen explained the situation and played Brian's voice message, Kevin's expression grew darker with each passing moment. Mrs. Miller, he said when the message ended, what your son and daughter-in-law are doing isn't just morally wrong, it's illegal in multiple ways. Elder financial abuse, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft. But more than that, they're using psychological manipulation techniques that are actually considered forms of torture in some contexts. Kevin pulled out his laptop and showed me screenshots he'd taken of Brian and Jennifer's social media accounts. I did some preliminary research before coming over. Look at this post from Jennifer's Facebook page last week. The post showed a carefully staged photo of Jennifer and Brian at my kitchen table, with Jennifer's arm around my shoulders. The caption read, "Spending quality time with Brian's mom today. It's not always easy caring for aging parents, but family is everything. Some days are harder than others, but we're committed to making sure she feels loved and supported during this difficult time. Number family first, number elder care, number blessed to help. She's building a public narrative," Kevin explained, making herself look like a devoted caregiver while subtly suggesting you're a burden who requires management. Look at the comments. I read through dozens of responses praising Jennifer and Brian for their dedication, with several people sharing their own struggles with aging parents. Jennifer had responded to each comment with humble gratitude and subtle hints about how challenging my care had become. "Now look at this," Kevin said, showing me another post from Brian's Instagram account. It was a meme about adult children having to become parents to their own parents, with the caption, "When you realize your weekend plans now revolve around managing someone else's medical appointments and emotional crises. Number adulting, number family responsibilities, number the struggle is real." I stared at the post, recognizing the weekend he was referring to. I'd asked him to drive me to a doctor's appointment because I'd been feeling anxious about discussing my grief with a new physician. What I'd seen as his loving support, he'd been presenting to his friends as a burden. "There are dozens of posts like this," Kevin continued. "They've been systematically documenting their sacrifices while making you look increasingly dependent and problematic. But here's what's really insidious. They've also been monitoring and manipulating your online presence." Kevin showed me my own Facebook account, which I rarely used but kept active to stay connected with former colleagues and students. "Look at your friend list from 6 months ago versus now. They've been unfriending people on your behalf, blocking posts that might reconnect you with your support network, and even declining event invitations without your knowledge." The evidence was overwhelming. Helen had been right about the isolation, but it was far more sophisticated than even she had realized. Brian and Jennifer hadn't just been discouraging my friendships, they'd been actively sabotaging them through digital manipulation. "The good news," Kevin said, "is that everything they've done leaves digital footprints. If we're smart about gathering evidence, we can not only expose their manipulation but also prove it was premeditated and systematic. We spent the next 2 hours planning our counterattack. Kevin would teach me how to use advanced recording equipment to document conversations with Brian and Jennifer. He would also help me gather evidence from their social media accounts and monitor their online activity to predict their next moves. The key, Kevin explained, is getting them to admit their plans on camera while they think no one is watching. People who commit fraud like this are often arrogant about their success. If we can create the right situation, they'll probably brag about how cleverly they've manipulated you. Helen would serve as my emotional support and backup documentation, helping to establish a timeline of their manipulation while coordinating with Kevin to ensure we captured everything we needed for both legal action and public exposure. But there's something else we should consider, Kevin said quietly. If we're going to expose them, we should do it in a way that's public and permanent. People like this often try to spin their way out of consequences. But if their own words are broadcast to everyone they know, there's no coming back from that. As Kevin packed up his laptop and Helen gathered her notes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years, hope backed by real power. For months, I'd been fighting a war I didn't even know I was in, using weapons I didn't understand against enemies who'd been planning my defeat since the day Robert died. But now I had allies who understood the battlefield better than Brian and Jennifer ever could. Now I had the tools to turn their own cruelty against them. Most importantly, now I had a plan that would ensure their betrayal became public knowledge, destroying their reputations as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy my independence. The next phase of our plan began with Kevin teaching me to become someone I'd never been before, a spy in my own family. He equipped me with recording devices so small and sophisticated they looked like jewelry, pens, and buttons. But more importantly, he taught me how to think like a strategist rather than a victim. Mrs. Miller, the key to exposing manipulators is getting them comfortable enough to reveal their true selves, Kevin explained as we tested the recording equipment in my living room. They've spent 2 years conditioning you to be passive and grateful. Now we're going to use that conditioning against them. Our first target was a family dinner I hosted the following Sunday. I prepared Robert's favorite pot roast, set the table with our good china, and invited Brian and Jennifer over for what I told them was a special meal to show my appreciation for everything you've done for me. The button camera Kevin had given me was perfectly positioned to capture both their faces and their reactions. I played my role flawlessly. Throughout dinner, I thanked them repeatedly for their patience with my confusion and neediness. I apologized for being such a burden and expressed gratitude for their willingness to help me navigate my declining independence. Every word was designed to make them feel secure in their manipulation. The strategy worked perfectly. As the evening progressed and they became more comfortable, their masks began slipping. Jennifer started making subtle digs about my housekeeping, disguised as concern. "Constance, I noticed you've been leaving dishes in the sink overnight again. That's not like you. Are you feeling overwhelmed by daily tasks?" Brian joined in with false worry. "Mom, maybe we should talk about getting you some help around the house. Jennifer's right that you seem to be struggling with things that used to be easy for you." But the real breakthrough came during dessert, when I mentioned finding some old financial documents of Robert's that I didn't understand. I found these papers in his desk drawer, and the numbers don't make sense to me. Maybe you could help me figure out what they mean? The change in both of them was immediate and dramatic. They exchanged the kind of look I'd learned to recognize as their silent communication, and their fake concern transformed into barely concealed excitement. "Of course, Mom," Brian said, leaning forward eagerly. "What kind of documents? Investment accounts? Insurance policies?" Jennifer added, with false casualness. "It's probably nothing important, but we should definitely take a look. Sometimes financial paperwork can seem confusing when you're not familiar with the terminology." I let them examine the carefully prepared fake documents Kevin had helped me create, watching as their greed overrode their caution. They spent 20 minutes discussing my confusion about basic financial concepts. while the button camera captured every patronizing explanation and every excited glance they shared. "You know what, Mom?" Brian finally said. "Why don't you let us take these documents home and review them properly? We can research what they mean and explain everything to you in simpler terms." "That would be wonderful," I replied with the grateful tone they expected. "I'm so lucky to have children who understand these complicated things. I don't know what I'd do without you." The recording from that dinner gave us our first piece of solid evidence, but Kevin wanted something even more damaging. "We need to catch them when they think they're completely alone," he said as we reviewed the footage. "People reveal their true thoughts when they believe no one is listening." That's when we developed the most sophisticated part of our plan, turning Brian and Jennifer's own house into a broadcasting station that would expose their cruelty to their entire social network. Kevin had discovered that Brian and Jennifer hosted a weekly gathering every Saturday evening with their friend group. They called it Wine and Wine Night, where couples would get together to drink and complain about their week. Through their social media posts, Kevin had identified exactly who attended these gatherings and when they occurred. "This is perfect," Kevin explained as he showed me the floor plan he'd created of their house. "They host these parties in their living room, which has perfect acoustics for recording. And based on their social media patterns, they always spend the first hour talking about family drama before their friends arrive." The technical challenge was installing broadcast equipment throughout their house without them knowing. But Kevin had a solution for that too. "They're going out of town next weekend for Jennifer's sister's wedding. That gives us a full Saturday to install everything and test the system." I felt nervous about breaking into their house, but Helen reminded me that I still had the key Brian had given me for emergencies. "This is an emergency," she said firmly. "Process. You're preventing them from committing elder abuse and financial fraud. If anything, you're performing a public service." The installation took 6 hours. Kevin brought equipment that looked like nothing more than small wireless speakers and decorative objects, but each piece was actually a sophisticated recording and broadcasting device. The centerpiece was a system that would automatically live stream audio and video to Brian and Jennifer's own social media accounts once activated. "The beauty of this setup," Kevin explained as he tested each component, "is that it uses their own devices and internet connection. When the broadcast starts, it will appear to be coming from their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. Everyone will think they intentionally shared their conversation. We programmed the system to activate automatically at 7 o'clock every Saturday evening, the exact time their weekly gatherings began. The broadcast would continue until manually shut off, ensuring that their cruelest conversations would be captured and shared with their entire social network. But we needed one more element to guarantee they would reveal their true feelings about me during the broadcast. That's where my final deception came into play. On Thursday, 3 days before their next gathering, I called Brian with a carefully scripted story. "Honey, I've been going through more of Dad's papers, and I found something concerning. There are some documents about accounts I didn't know existed, and I think there might be more money than we realized." Brian's interest was immediate and intense. "What kind of accounts, Mom? How much money are we talking about?" "I'm not sure. The papers are confusing, and some of them seem to reference investments Dad never told me about. I was hoping you and Jennifer could help me understand what I'm looking at." "Of course. Why don't you bring the documents over this weekend? We can go through everything together." "Actually," I said, playing my hand perfectly, "I have that medical appointment Dr. Patterson scheduled for Saturday afternoon. You know, the one about my memory concerns? Could you and Jennifer maybe look at the papers while I'm at the appointment? I've made copies of everything, and I could leave them at your house Saturday morning." Brian could barely contain his excitement. "That sounds perfect, Mom. We'll have time to review everything properly and research what the documents mean. Don't worry about any of this. We'll handle everything." What Brian didn't know was that the documents I would leave were more fake financial papers Kevin had created, designed to make them believe I had discovered a substantial hidden inheritance. The papers included references to offshore accounts, life insurance policies, and investment funds that would make them think Robert had left far more money than they'd realized. "This is going to drive them crazy with greed," Kevin said as he put the finishing touches on our fake financial documents. "They'll spend the entire evening discussing how to access money that doesn't exist, and they'll do it while broadcasting live to everyone they know." The final piece of our trap was the timing. I would call Brian Saturday morning to tell him I was leaving the documents on his kitchen counter before my appointment. But instead of going to any medical appointment, I would park across the street from their house and watch the entire evening unfold through the live stream on Kevin's laptop. "When their friends arrive and they start mocking you while discussing their plans to steal your imaginary inheritance," Kevin explained, "it will all be broadcast to their Facebook followers, their professional contacts, their neighbors, and everyone in their social circle." Helen, Kevin, and I spent Friday evening doing final preparations and testing our equipment one more time. As we reviewed our plan, I felt a mixture of anticipation and calm determination that surprised me. For 2 years, I'd been the victim of their manipulation. Tomorrow, I would become the architect of their complete social and professional destruction. "Are you ready for this, Mrs. Miller?" Kevin asked as we finished our preparations. I thought about Brian's voice message, about Jennifer's cruel laughter, about their plans to have me declared incompetent and steal my independence. I thought about the months of gaslighting, the isolation from my friends, the systematic destruction of my confidence and autonomy. "I've been ready since the moment I heard that voice message," I said. "Tomorrow, everyone they know is going to see exactly who Brian and Jennifer really are, and they're going to destroy themselves with their own words." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that feels like destiny. I woke at 6, made Robert's favorite breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, and sat at my kitchen table reviewing the final details of our plan. At 7:30, I called Brian to confirm our arrangement. "Good morning, honey," I said, infusing my voice with the confused gratitude they'd come to expect. "I'm about to leave those financial documents on your counter before my appointment with Dr. Patterson. Are you sure you don't mind looking through them while I'm gone?" "Not at all, Mom," Brian replied, and I could hear the barely contained excitement in his voice. "Jennifer and I cleared our afternoon specifically to help you with this. We want to make sure you understand exactly what Dad left behind. You're both so good to me. I don't know how I'd manage these complicated things without your help." After ending the call, I drove to Brian's house and used my emergency key to leave the fake documents Kevin had prepared. The papers looked completely authentic, complete with official letterheads and financial jargon that suggested Robert had hidden nearly $800,000 in various investment accounts. Kevin had even included references to offshore holdings and life insurance policies that would make Brian and Jennifer believe they'd discovered a massive windfall. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was parked in Helen's car, 3 houses down from Brian's address, with Kevin's laptop open between us. We'd tested the surveillance system one final time that morning, and every camera and microphone was functioning perfectly. The live stream was set to activate automatically at 7 p.m., broadcasting simultaneously to Brian and Jennifer's Facebook Live, Instagram Live, and Twitter feeds. "Remember," Kevin said as he made final adjustments to our equipment, "once the broadcast starts, there's no stopping it remotely. They'll have to figure out how to end it themselves, which means they'll be panicking while hundreds of people are watching and recording everything they say." Through the living room window, I could see Brian and Jennifer moving around their house, clearly preparing for their weekly gathering. They'd been home since noon, which meant they'd had several hours to review the fake financial documents and work themselves into a frenzy of greed and planning. At 6:15, their first guests arrived. Amy and Thomas Richardson, a couple from their neighborhood who regularly attended the Saturday wine gatherings. Amy was a real estate agent who often posted about family values on social media, while Thomas worked in banking and frequently shared articles about financial responsibility. They had no idea they were about to witness their friends reveal themselves as elder abusers and would-be thieves. "This is perfect," Helen whispered as we watched more cars arrive. "Look at who's coming tonight. The Richardsons, the Petersons, that couple from Jennifer's work." These are all people who think Brian and Jennifer are devoted family members. More guests arrived over the next 20 minutes. The Petersons from down the street, Michelle and Gary from Jennifer's office, and David and Lisa, who I recognized from Brian's social media posts as his closest friends. By 6:45, there were 4 couples gathered in Brian and Jennifer's living room, drinks in hand, settling in for what they thought would be a normal evening of socializing. Kevin's laptop showed the view from our hidden cameras positioned throughout the room. Brian and Jennifer were playing the perfect hosts, serving wine and appetizers while making casual conversation about work and weekend plans. But I could see the barely contained excitement in their body language. They kept glancing at each other with the kind of meaningful looks I'd learned to recognize as their silent communication. "Look at Jennifer's face," Kevin pointed out. "She's practically vibrating with excitement. Whatever they've convinced themselves about those fake documents, they can barely contain their eagerness to discuss it." At 6:58, exactly 2 minutes before our broadcast was set to begin, Jennifer made an announcement to the group. "Before everyone gets too comfortable, Brian and I have some family news to share. We've had quite a discovery this afternoon." Amy Richardson immediately perked up with interest. "Oh, what kind of discovery?" "That sounds intriguing." Brian stepped forward with the fake documents in his hand, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "My mother found some papers today that revealed my father had been hiding a substantial amount of money. We're talking about nearly $800,000 that no one knew existed." The room erupted in surprised congratulations and excited questions. Thomas asked about investment strategies, while Michelle wanted to know how the money had been hidden for so long. Brian and Jennifer basked in the attention, clearly enjoying being the center of their friends' fascination. But what they didn't notice was the small red recording light that had just activated on Jennifer's phone, sitting on the coffee table in plain view of everyone in the room. At exactly 7 p.m., our broadcast system had come online, and their conversation was now being live-streamed to their combined social media following of over 800 people. Kevin's laptop showed the growing viewership count in real time. Within minutes, dozens of people had joined the live stream, including neighbors, colleagues, family members, and casual acquaintances who thought they were watching Brian and Jennifer share good news about a family windfall. "Now comes the interesting part," Helen said quietly. "Watch how their story changes when they think they can be completely honest with their friends." As if on cue, Jennifer's demeanor shifted from excited gratitude to something much darker. "The funny thing is," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "Constance had no idea this money existed. She's been living like a church mouse, worrying about her finances, while sitting on a fortune." Amy looked confused. "But surely that's good news for her. She can stop worrying about money now." Brian and Jennifer exchanged one of their meaningful glances, and I watched their masks drop completely. "Well," Brian said with a laugh that made my skin crawl, "that's assuming she's competent enough to manage that kind of money. And frankly, she's not." The room fell quiet, and I could see their friends' expressions changing as they sensed a shift in tone. But Brian and Jennifer were too excited by their perceived victory to notice the growing discomfort around them. "What do you mean?" David asked carefully. Jennifer leaned forward, clearly relishing the opportunity to share what she saw as their masterful manipulation. "We've been documenting Constance's declining mental state for months. Poor decision-making, memory issues, increasing dependency on us for basic tasks. Dr. Patterson is already concerned about early dementia." Through Kevin's laptop, I could see the livestream comments beginning to appear from viewers who were growing increasingly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. Old students of mine, neighbors from my street, and former colleagues were starting to realize they were witnessing something much darker than a celebration. "The timing couldn't be more perfect," Brian continued, completely oblivious to the fact that his words were being broadcast to hundreds of people. "We've been working toward getting power of attorney anyway, but this discovery makes it even more urgent. Someone needs to protect this money from her poor judgment." Thomas Richardson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Brian, are you saying you're planning to take control of your mother's finances against her will?" Not against her will, Jennifer said with false sweetness. For her protection. She's already grateful for everything we do to manage her life. When we explain that we need to protect her inheritance from her own declining capabilities, she'll probably thank us. The livestream comments were now flooding in faster than Kevin could read them. People were tagging friends, sharing the stream, and expressing their shock at what they were witnessing. I recognized names from my neighborhood, my former school, and my church community, all watching in real time as my son and daughter-in-law revealed their plan to steal my independence and my assets. But Brian and Jennifer were just getting started. Emboldened by their friend's presence and completely unaware of their growing audience, they began sharing details about their manipulation that even I hadn't fully understood. You should see how easy it's been to isolate her from her support network, Jennifer said with obvious pride. We convinced her to stop seeing that nosy neighbor who kept filling her head with doubts about our intentions. We got her to quit her volunteer activities by making her think she wasn't mentally capable of handling social commitments. And the best part, Brian added with cruel satisfaction, is that she's so grateful for our help that she doesn't even realize we're managing every aspect of her life now. She thinks we're devoted caregivers instead of seeing us as the burden we really are. The silence in the room was becoming deafening, but neither Brian nor Jennifer seemed to notice. They were too caught up in their moment of triumph, too excited about their clever manipulation to read the horrified expressions on their friends' faces. Amy Richardson was the first to glance at Jennifer's phone and notice the recording light. Her face went pale as she realized what was happening, but Brian was still talking, completely oblivious to the disaster unfolding around him. By next month, we'll have full control of her finances and the authority to make decisions about her living situation. There are some really nice memory care facilities that would be perfect for someone at her stage of decline. That's when Amy found her voice. Jennifer? She said quietly, pointing at the phone. Why is Facebook Live active on your phone? The moment Amy pointed at the phone, the entire room froze like a photograph. Jennifer's face went white as she grabbed her device and stared at the screen in absolute horror. The red recording light glowed like an accusation, and the viewer count showed 347 people watching live. Oh my God, Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible. We're broadcasting. We're live on Facebook. Brian snatched the phone from her hands, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing panic as he saw the flood of comments streaming across the screen. Names he recognized, faces from their professional and personal lives, all watching and recording everything they'd just said. How long has this been going? He demanded, his voice cracking with fear. I don't know, Jennifer shrieked, grabbing at the phone. Turn it off! How do we turn it off? But it was too late. Kevin's system had been designed to resist quick termination, and their panicked fumbling with the phone only made them look more guilty, as hundreds of viewers watched their desperate attempts to end the broadcast. Their friends sat in stunned silence, finally understanding what they'd just witnessed. Amy Richardson's face showed pure disgust as she stared at Brian and Jennifer. You were just bragging about manipulating your elderly mother, in front of all of us, and it was being broadcast live. This is insane, Thomas added, standing up from his chair. You're talking about stealing from a grieving widow, your own mother, and you're proud of it. Through Kevin's laptop, I could see the comments section exploding with outrage. My former students were sharing the stream and tagging their friends. Neighbors from my street were expressing their shock and promising to check on me. Colleagues from Brian's consulting firm were watching their employee reveal himself as an elder abuser in real time. Wait, Brian said, still frantically trying to shut off the broadcast. You don't understand. My mother really is declining. We're trying to protect her. Protect her? Michelle from Jennifer's office stood up, her voice filled with contempt. You just spent 20 minutes describing how you've been isolating her from friends, lying to her doctor, and planning to steal her money. That's not protection, that's abuse. Jennifer finally managed to end the Facebook live stream, but the damage was catastrophic and irreversible. The video had been automatically saved, and dozens of viewers had already recorded copies. Within minutes, it would be shared across multiple platforms, preserved forever as evidence of their cruelty. "You need to leave," David said to Brian, his voice cold with disgust. "Lisa and I are leaving, and we don't want to see either of you again." "David, please, let me explain," Brian started, but his longtime friend cut him off. "Explain what?" "How you've been psychologically torturing your widowed mother. How you've been planning to have her declared incompetent so you can steal her money." "There's nothing to explain, Brian. You're a monster." The room erupted into chaos as their friends began grabbing their coats and heading for the door. Amy Richardson turned back at the threshold, her real estate agent's professional demeanor completely abandoned. "I hope you know that video is going to follow you everywhere," she said with cold satisfaction. "Everyone we knows has already seen it. Your neighbors, your colleagues, your clients. Your reputations are destroyed, and you did it to yourselves." As their friends fled, Brian and Jennifer were left alone in their living room, staring at each other in growing horror as they began to understand the scope of their exposure. Jennifer's phone was buzzing constantly with notifications, and when she opened her social media apps, her face crumpled at what she saw. "It's everywhere," she whispered. "It's been shared hundreds of times already. People are tagging our employers, our families, everyone we know." Brian grabbed his own phone and saw the same devastation. The video had been shared to his business Facebook page, his LinkedIn profile, and the community forums for their neighborhood. His consulting clients were commenting with disgust and threatening to terminate their contracts. Jennifer's co-workers were expressing their shock that they'd been working alongside someone capable of such cruelty. "How did this happen?" Brian demanded, his voice rising with panic. "How did our phones start broadcasting without us knowing?" From my position across the street, I watched through Kevin's cameras as they searched their house frantically, looking for hidden recording equipment. They found the first device within minutes, a small camera Kevin had placed on their bookshelf. "Someone's been spying on us," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "Someone set this up deliberately." They found 3 more devices over the next 20 minutes, each discovery adding to their panic and paranoia. But Kevin had installed so many recording points throughout their house that they would never find them all, and more importantly, the damage was already done. "It had to be your mother," Jennifer finally said, sinking onto their couch with her head in her hands. "She's the only one who had access to our house. She still has that emergency key." Brian stared at her in disbelief. "My mother? The woman we've been calling mentally incompetent for months? You think she orchestrated this? Who else could it be? She must have found out about our plans somehow." As if summoned by their realization, my phone rang. Brian's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the calm, steady voice of someone who held all the power. "Hello, Brian." "Mom?" His voice was shaking with rage and desperation. "What did you do? How did you do this?" "I did exactly what you've been telling everyone I'm not capable of doing," I replied calmly. "I made intelligent decisions to protect myself from people who were trying to harm me. You don't understand. You've ruined our lives. Our friends hate us. Our careers are over. Everyone thinks we're monsters." "You are monsters," I said, my voice hardening. "You spent 2 years systematically destroying my confidence, isolating me from my friends, and planning to steal my independence. The only thing I did was make sure everyone could see who you really are. We were trying to help you. You're not capable of managing your own life." I laughed, a sound that carried years of suppressed anger and newfound strength. "Brian, I just orchestrated the complete destruction of your social and professional reputations using technology you didn't even know I understood. Does that sound like someone who's mentally incompetent?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute before Jennifer grabbed the phone. "Constance, please, you have to help us fix this. We can explain to people that this was all a misunderstanding. We can tell them you're confused about our intentions." "No, Jennifer," I said with absolute finality. "I'm done being manipulated by you. I'm done pretending your cruelty is concern. And I'm done allowing you to treat my grief and loneliness as weaknesses you can exploit. But we're family." Brian's voice came through the speaker, desperate and breaking. Family doesn't gaslight each other. Family doesn't plan to have each other declared incompetent for financial gain. Family doesn't mock each other's pain for entertainment. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was nothing more than an obstacle to your inheritance. Through Kevin's cameras, I could see them both crying now, finally understanding that their carefully constructed manipulation had collapsed completely. Their phones continued buzzing with notifications as the video spread further through their social networks, destroying relationships and professional connections they'd spent years building. The emergency key you gave me is on your kitchen counter. I continued. I won't be needing it anymore. And Brian? That voice message you accidentally sent me 3 weeks ago has been forwarded to Dr. Patterson, along with recordings of every conversation where you and Jennifer discussed your plans to have me declared incompetent. He's quite interested in speaking with both of you about medical fraud. I hung up the phone and sat back in Helen's passenger seat, watching as the lights in Brian and Jennifer's house flickered on and off as they continued their frantic search for recording equipment they would never find. It's over, Kevin said quietly, closing his laptop. Their entire social and professional network has seen exactly who they are. There's no coming back from this kind of exposure. Helen reached over and squeezed my hand. How do you feel, Constance? I thought about that question as we drove away from the scene of Brian and Jennifer's complete humiliation. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like myself again. Intelligent, capable, and completely in control of my own life. I feel free, I said finally. I feel like the woman Robert married, not the victim they tried to create. The aftermath of that Saturday night broadcast exceeded even Kevin's predictions about social media virality. By Sunday morning, the video had been shared over 2,000 times across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Local news stations picked up the story after several viewers submitted copies of the recording, running segments about elder abuse awareness with Brian and Jennifer's humiliation as the centerpiece. The professional consequences were swift and devastating. Brian's consulting firm received dozens of calls from disgusted clients demanding to end their contracts with someone capable of such cruelty toward his own mother. By Tuesday, he'd lost over 70% of his business, with the remaining clients expressing serious concerns about his character and judgment. Jennifer fared even worse. Her employer, a family-oriented law firm that marketed itself on trust and integrity, placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation into her conduct. But the social destruction was even more complete. Their neighborhood Facebook group, which had over 500 members, became a forum for people to share their disgust with Brian and Jennifer's behavior. Neighbors who had once considered them model citizens now crossed the street to avoid speaking to them. Their friend group completely abandoned them, with several people posting public statements distancing themselves from the couple's actions. The most satisfying response came from Amy Richardson, who posted a lengthy Facebook message that was shared hundreds of times. I want everyone to know that what we witnessed on that live stream was not a moment of poor judgment, but a calculated discussion of ongoing abuse. Brian and Jennifer spent 20 minutes bragging about manipulating an elderly widow with obvious pride and satisfaction. This is who they really are, and I'm ashamed I ever called them friends. Within a week, Brian and Jennifer's house went up for sale. The constant stares from neighbors, the whispered conversations that stopped when they appeared, and the complete social isolation had made their lives in the community unbearable. They were learning firsthand what it felt like to be ostracized and treated as burdens, exactly what they'd been doing to me for 2 years. My twist of the knife came 2 weeks after the broadcast, when I made a decision that surprised even Helen and Kevin. I sold my house, the one Brian and Jennifer had been so eager to access, and used the proceeds to move into Sunset Gardens, a vibrant senior living community 30 miles away. But this wasn't the kind of assisted living facility they'd been planning to warehouse me in. Sunset Gardens was an active adult community where residents owned their own apartments and participated in a rich variety of social, educational, and recreational activities. I chose it specifically because it represented everything Brian and Jennifer had tried to convince me I wasn't capable of: independence, social engagement, and active decision-making about my own life. With the remaining money from my house sale, I made a donation to the National Center on Elder Abuse, specifically earmarking the funds for educational programs about financial exploitation by family members. The donation was made in honor of all the children who forgot that their parents deserve respect. And when the center issued their thank you press release, it included that dedication along with my story. The local newspaper picked up the donation story, running a follow-up article about my situation that painted a stark contrast between my new life of independence and dignity versus my son and daughter-in-law's public disgrace. The article included a quote from me that became widely shared on social media. I discovered that the people who claimed I wasn't capable of living independently were actually the only obstacles to my independence. Sunset Gardens turned out to be exactly what I'd needed without knowing it. My neighbors were retired teachers, engineers, nurses, and business owners who treated each other as peers rather than burdens. We organized book clubs, cooking classes, game nights, and volunteer activities. I started teaching a weekly writing workshop for residents who wanted to document their life stories, using my English teaching background in a way that felt meaningful and appreciated. The social connections I'd lost during Brian and Jennifer's manipulation campaign were gradually rebuilt, but with people who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they felt obligated by blood relations. Helen Chen visited regularly, often bringing Kevin, who had become like a grandson to me. Their authentic care and respect stood in sharp contrast to the false concern I'd endured for 2 years. My new independence extended to every aspect of my life. I managed my own finances, made my own medical decisions, and chose my own social activities without anyone suggesting I wasn't capable of such responsibilities. The confidence Brian and Jennifer had systematically destroyed through gaslighting and isolation gradually returned as I proved to myself daily that I was entirely competent to live life on my own terms. 6 months after the broadcast, I received a letter from Brian. It was filled with self-pity and attempts at emotional manipulation, describing how their lives had been ruined by my overreaction to their genuine concern. He claimed they'd learned from their mistakes and wanted to rebuild our relationship, suggesting that family forgiveness was more important than holding grudges. I read the letter once, then threw it away without responding. The man who wrote that letter still didn't understand that what they'd done was criminal abuse rather than misguided concern. He was still trying to manipulate me into accepting responsibility for the consequences of his own actions. Some people are simply incapable of genuine remorse or change. Jennifer sent a Christmas card that year, featuring a photo of them looking somber and defeated. Inside, she'd written a note about how much they missed me and hoped we could work through our differences. The card went directly into my recycling bin. I had no interest in working through differences with people who saw my grief as an opportunity and my love as a weakness to exploit. But the most meaningful part of my new life was the work I began doing with other elder abuse survivors. The National Center on Elder Abuse asked me to speak at conferences about financial exploitation by family members, and my story became part of their educational materials for social workers and law enforcement. I discovered that my experience, while painful, had given me unique insights that could help protect other vulnerable seniors. Helen Chen and I started a support group at Sunset Gardens for residents who'd experienced manipulation or abuse from family members. We met monthly, sharing stories and strategies for maintaining independence while navigating complicated family relationships. The group grew from 3 members to over 20 within a year, as word spread about a safe space where people could discuss family betrayal without judgment. One of our group members, a retired nurse named Dorothy, had been financially exploited by her daughter for years before recognizing the pattern and fighting back. The hardest part, she told us during one meeting, wasn't losing the money. It was accepting that my own child was capable of such calculated cruelty. That sentiment was echoed by every member of our group. The financial losses could be recovered, the social isolation could be rebuilt, but the fundamental betrayal of trust by people we'd loved unconditionally left scars that required different kinds of healing. I started visiting Robert's grave monthly instead of weekly. But my conversations with him had changed completely. Instead of apologizing for my perceived weaknesses or promising to try harder to manage on my own, I updated him on my new life and thanked him for the financial security that had allowed me to choose independence over tolerating abuse. I finally understand what you meant about not letting them make me small. I told his headstone during one visit. They tried to convince me I was shrinking, but I was actually just being crushed. Now that I'm free from their weight, I'm bigger than I ever imagined I could be. The peace I felt now was different from anything I'd experienced during my marriage or teaching career. This was earned peace, built on the foundation of having fought for my own dignity and won. I had learned that I was stronger than grief, smarter than my manipulators, and more resilient than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. As I sat in my sunny apartment at Sunset Gardens, surrounded by books I'd chosen, furniture I'd selected, and photographs of people who genuinely cared about me, I realized that Brian and Jennifer had actually given me an unexpected gift. By trying to destroy my independence, they'd forced me to discover capabilities I never knew I possessed. By isolating me from my old life, they'd pushed me to build a better one. I was no longer someone who could be gaslit, manipulated, or exploited. I was someone who fought back intelligently and effectively. Most importantly, I was someone who had learned that the best revenge isn't just exposing your abusers. It's building a life so fulfilling and authentic that their absence becomes a blessing rather than a loss. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to survivor. Sharing this story isn't just about my healing. It's about helping others recognize that family manipulation is real, devastating, and absolutely unacceptable. Every week through our support group at Sunset Gardens, I meet people who ignored their instincts because they wanted to believe their family members loved them unconditionally. The most important lesson I've learned is that respect and dignity should be inherent in all family relationships. Age never makes someone deserving of cruelty, mockery, or manipulation from their own children. When family members consistently make you feel small, worthless, or burdensome, that's not love expressing itself awkwardly. That's abuse disguised as concern. This happened to me, but the truth is, it can happen to anyone. Elder abuse by family members is far more common than most people realize. It starts with small boundary violations, subtle put-downs, and gradual isolation that seems caring on the surface. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was wrong with how a family member treated you? Have you noticed patterns where someone made you question your own judgment or capabilities? Share your story below, not for sympathy, but to help others recognize these warning signs before it's too late. By talking openly about family betrayal and emotional manipulation, we protect each other. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to trust their instincts and fight back. Subscribe to join our community of people who believe that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect, regardless of their age or perceived usefulness to others.